Peterson, you mentioned these ideas of responsibility, of virtue, of respect. You've, I think, detailed what you think students shouldn't do in these examples of like protests and these examples of certain types of activist tactics. What advice would you have for students? How can students make the changes that they want to make? Particularly, do you have any advice for students here?
Yeah, read great books. Really, man. You've got this 4-year period that has been carved out of your lives by society. It's given you an identity, like a high-quality identity, and freedom at the same time. And you're not going to get that again in your life. You've got a respectable identity, university student, and complete freedom associated with that, or as near as you're ever going to get. And you've got these unbelievable libraries that are full of the writings of people who are intelligent and articulate beyond comprehension. And you know, and you can go there and you can learn all this. And you might think, well, why should you learn it? Well, you learn it to get a job, or you learn it to get good grades, or you learn it to get a degree. And that's all nonsense. It's nonsense. The reason that you come to university to be educated is because there is nothing more powerful than someone who is articulate and who can think and speak. It's power. And I mean power of the best sort. It's authority and influence and respectability and competence. And so you come to university to craft your highest skill. And your highest skill is to be found in articulated speech. And if you're a master at formulating your arguments, you win everything. And better than that, when you win everything, everyone around you wins too. Because to transform yourself into, let's consider your transformation into something approximating the logos, it means you shine a light on the whole world. Well, there's nothing more exciting to do than that. There's nothing better you can possibly do. And to think that you're coming to university to be, you know, trained to have a job, it's like, great, that's a hell of a lot better than being unemployed and covered with Cheeto dust while you're snacking away in front of your video game in the basement. But it's not a, and I don't have anything against video games, by the way, but but it's hardly a triumphant call to being in the world, and that's what university should be calling forth. It's like, God, you people, you know, I know what Harvard students are like. I taught here for 5 years. You people are spectacular. You're spectacular. You're all capable of being world beaters. You transform yourself into something that's articulated and sensible and grounded in history and knowledgeable and wise, man. You can do anything you want, and hopefully anything you want for good. Because if you have any sense, everything you want to do would be for the good, because there's nothing more compelling or meaningful or useful in combating the tragedy of life than to struggle with all your soul on behalf of the good. And the universities have forgotten that. It's why everyone's bailing out of the humanities, and they should. The humanities are corrupt. And they're corrupt because they're not telling students this. It's so bloody obvious. It's like, learn to think, learn to speak, learn to read. It makes you a superpower, an individual superpower. You have and I don't understand why that isn't just told to students. It's not that hard to understand, and everyone wants to hear it. It's like, really, I could do that? I could do that? It's like, yeah, really, you could do that. And the whole society around you has labored for really thousands of years to provide every single one of you with this spectacular opportunity that you have while you're undergraduates and graduate students here, man. Everyone's just praying that you would come here and manifest everything that you could manifest. And that's what you should be doing, instead of waving placards and complaining about how you're oppressed, for God's sake. You see these Yale students complaining about their oppression. It just leaves me aghast. It's like, well, we're against the ruling class. It's like, no, you're baby ruling class members. You're young. The only reason you're not rich is because you're young. You know, that's the best. Really, if you look at the 1% even, the dreaded 1%, you know, most of those people are old. Why? Well, when you progress through life, if you're reasonably successful, you trade in your promising youth for your wealthy old age. But you're still bloody old. Would you trade it? Would you trade your youth for that? Like, if you factor age out of the economic equation, things look a lot different. Well, of course older people have more money. If they have any sense, they've been collecting it for their whole life. Is that somehow unfair? It's not unfair unless you want to be poverty-stricken when you're 70. And you don't want to be poverty-stricken when you're 70. So I just don't understand what's happened to the universities. I can't believe that you're not told when you come the first day, look, man, you're here on a heroic mission. You're going to take your capacity to articulate yourself to levels that are undreamed of. You're going to come out of here unstoppable. You're going to be able to do anything you want. It's like, that's what you're here for. Instead, you're taught that, well, you know, the world's a pretty oppressive place, and you're probably the bottom of the victim pile, and there's virtually nothing you can do about it except, you know, deconstruct the patriarchy. And it's so weak-kneed and so pathetic that universities should be embarrassed that that's what they're peddling to students. I'm embarrassed by it. You know, I've gone on public record telling parents, bloody well send your boys to trade school, because at least they'll learn something useful. And that's a terrible thing for someone like me to say, because I do believe that that being articulated and educated in the highest possible manner there's nothing that's better for you and for society. And why have the universities forgotten this? Well, that's postmodern neo-Marxism for you, you know, then the philosophy of intense resentment and oppression and group identity, and God, it's just pathetic.
Dr. Peterson, I think a lot of students here would agree with you that one of the main purposes of education at college, particularly at Harvard, is to develop their sense of articulation, their ability to read, their ability to critically think. But then what comes after? Particularly at Harvard, there's a big discussion on what is a good life? What does it mean to use those skills that we get here, and then we graduate? What do we do from there?
Stop unnecessary suffering. That's what you do. You know, that's your calling. It's like you say, well, what do you do after you graduate? Well, if you graduate articulated and powerful, there will be people giving you so many opportunities you won't even be able to keep up with them. You know, and I've worked with very, very competent people in many different domains in my life, hyper-competent people. And I can tell you some very interesting things about hyper-competent people. The first thing is they are not selfish, and they're not greedy. And one of the great pleasures in their lives is to find people who have the capacity to also be hyper-competent and to open doors for them as rapidly as they can possibly be opened. They delight in that, because there's very few things that are more intrinsically meaningful if you're an accomplished person than to find young people who have the possibility of being accomplished and say, hey, look, here's an opportunity for you. It's like, go out there, man, kill it. And then they go out there and kill it, and you think, right on, man. Here's another opportunity. Why don't you go out there and nail that, too? And you think, no, they're all hoarding their wealth, and they're not going to share it with anyone. It's like, that's absolute, complete rubbish. And so you don't even have to worry about what you're going to do after you graduate from here if you turn yourself into half of what you could be, because people will be dying to offer you every opportunity that you can possibly make use of. So it's a moot point. The world is always desperately short of people who can think and speak. And you think, well, I won't be made use of. Well, first of all, you can't say that if you're at Harvard, for God's sake. I mean, people already figured out who you are. They've already figured it out. And they're offering you the world on a gold platter. Take it. It's yours. Take it. It's like, great, man. Put yourself together and deserve it. That would be great. And that's what everyone wants. It's what your parents want. It's also what you want. You know it. It's what you want. It's what women want from men. It's what men want from women. It's like for you to be who you could be. And the highest faculty of the human being is articulated speech. It's the divine faculty. And there is nothing more powerful than that. There's nothing that's even in the same league. And so if you don't have faith in that, then your priorities are misplaced. And I can't even understand why you wouldn't have faith in that being, say, Harvard students, because look where it's got you already. You know, you're already sitting on top of the world. So deserve it, make use of it, right? Go out there and fix things up. That's what you need to do. There's lots of things that need to be fixed up. And what you want to do is burden yourself with so much responsibility that you can barely stand. And then you'll get stronger trying to lift it up. And you won't be asking, what should I be doing with my life, or what's the meaning of life, or any of that. It'll be self-evident. It's self-evident. At minimum, you can say, there's more suffering in the world than there should be, and I could probably do something about that. And you can do something about that. So go do something about it. And then there'll be less suffering in the world. And then when you're 80, you can look back on your life and say, well, you know, there's less suffering in the world than there would have been had I known it existed. And you don't have to even have a sense of ultimate destiny, or even any sort of theistic belief to regard that as a positive good. Like, I think it goes beyond the mere pragmatic utility of addressing the world's ills, because I think we do live in a world that has a transcendent reality as well as the reality that we can detect. But even independently of that, it doesn't matter. It's like, I mean, this is part of the reason I like people like Bill Gates is a great example, man. That guy he's after 5 major diseases at the same time, right? He's trying to wipe out polio. He's trying to wipe out malaria. Yeah, exactly. He's trying to wipe out malaria. It's like, well, what should you do with your life? Well, you know, take a look at Bill Gates and see if you could do something like that. That would be good.
So Dr. Peterson, you talk about this idea of ending unnecessary suffering and this idea of committing one's life to that.
At a minimum. I mean, that's just the obvious thing that you could do.
A lot of students, I think, accept that premise and view what they're doing as trying to eliminate or reduce unnecessary suffering, and they see activism or other forms of direct service as fulfilling that goal. Do you simply disagree with like the content of what they think, the tactic that they are using to end unnecessary suffering, or do you think that their motives or their intentions are not even the same as yours?
It's too public. You know, there's this old saying from the New Testament about not praying in public, right? And the idea is that if you're going to commune for the higher good, you should do it in private, because otherwise you're warping your ethic in some sense by demonstrating how virtuous you are to the world. It's like, you know, you go out there with a stick and a sign on it that says, "I'm against poverty." It's like, yeah, no kidding, man. Really. Like, who's for poverty? No one's for poverty. So it's an abdication of responsibility with the mask of social virtue. You want to solve a difficult problem, is you figure out how to get along with your brother, the one you've been fighting with for 5 years, or see if you can staple your family back together. See if you can stop fighting with your girlfriend and have a relationship that lasts for more than 2 weeks. You know, it's like there are things that you should be doing in the confines of your own life that are private and humble, that would constitute genuine accomplishments, and those are the things that you should attend to. And no one's going to come along and say, "Hey, you know, good job, you're changing the world," because it's private, but it's real. And people don't do that. And so no, I don't trust the activist. I don't trust the activist ethos at all. I think everything about it is superficial and trendy and too easy, and it externalizes the blame. The evil is always elsewhere, which is a dreadful mistake to make, because the evil isn't elsewhere. That's the thing that you understand when you're wise. Is the evil is not elsewhere. It's you, because you're not everything you could be. And so, you know, you should work on that before going and telling someone else that maybe they're not who they should be. So I think it's, you know, so I don't buy it. It's too easy. It's far too easy, and it's too public, and it's too self-congratulatory. And then there's the murderous, like, Marxist element, which, you know, I'm always often inclined to mention.
So certainly, I think you've identified certain causes where the public element of trying to do good or the self-congratulatory version of trying to do good could be harmful. But do you think there are cases, for instance, I'm thinking of policy, influencing policy, being a policymaker. It seems like something like that, public policy, could be used to eliminate some unnecessary suffering, but would involve a more public domain, something where you are trying to attract followers, trying to attract praise from other people.
Look, if you've established yourself in the world as a credible human being, and people are asking you to enter public service because of your accomplishments, then it's time to do it. Right. But before that, it's a little on the premature side. And if you're just setting yourself forward as an avatar of an ideology, then there's nothing to you except, I think of it as the chattering of various forms of demons. It's like you're not helpful. And if you look, you want to think, okay, are you fit to lead? Let's put it that way. Okay, first of all, do you know where you're going? Because that's actually one of the hallmarks of a leader. A leader knows where he's going, and maybe other people are also interested in going that way. But the leaders I've met have carved themselves out a personal vision, right? It's not some cookie cutter ideological solution to the ills of the planet. They've done a detailed analysis, right? They know what they're talking about. And they're usually people, well, they've had a successful relationship. They've had a successful family. They have a couple of degrees. They've established a business. Like, they've made themselves credible in 5 or 6 dimensions. well, then maybe you know enough about the world to dare to mess with its internal mechanisms. And if you don't have that kind of in-depth knowledge, then you should no more work on the economic systems of Western civilization than you should try to adjust the electronic systems of your automobile, because the latter is far less complex than the former. So of course there's utility in policy formulation and in government service and in all of those sorts of things. But you have to have transformed yourself, at least to some degree, into someone who's actually competent before you should even dare to do such things. You think, well, I've read some Marx and now I know how to change the world. It's like, that's a very bad idea, because the probability that you're going to take something complex that doesn't work too badly and fix it with your idiotic intervention is 0. So,
well put. You talked a little bit about this idea of signaling virtue, and one thing that I thought about, a lot of activist causes, ones you might characterize as self-congratulatory, seem to emphasize concepts like validation and affirmation. In your experience, either as a professor, as a psychologist, do you think that this is an example of virtue signaling, and perhaps provide like a definition of virtue signaling first? Or do you think there's some value in these types of principles or these types of interactions?
I don't think there's any value in those principles at all. I mean, I can say, well, I think you're a really good guy.
Oh,
you know,
thanks.
yeah.
Dr.
And I mean,
Peterson.
at most, that's well, first of all, it's cheap and easy. That was easy, and now I'm a good guy because, you know, I'm perfectly willing to affirm you. It's like everyone has a problem, let's say, with self-affirmation. This is why I hate that word, but I'll use it temporarily. This is part of the reason why I'm an admirer of in part of the existential philosophers and psychologists, because one of the points they made is that, well, human beings are flawed creatures. We have tragic lives. We're very, very vulnerable, and so it's very easy for us to despise ourselves and to despise and have contempt for humanity itself. And there are reasons for that. We're weak. We're flawed. We're malevolent. We don't last very long. We're not very attractive. We have an endless litany of faults, both as a species and as individuals. Well, so you're stuck with that. That's just part of being itself. It's built into the fabric of being. So what do you do about that? Well, you don't go around waiting for someone to tell you what a good person you are. That's not, first of all, it's not believable. It's not helpful. That doesn't mean you should be tormenting people into a sense of even more fallibility than they already have. Clearly that's not helpful. But the way that you develop a sense of respect for yourself, which is a better way of thinking about it, or respect for humanity for that matter, which is much better than thinking about it as an affirmation, is to bear up under the damn load. And then you can recognize yourself as something that's flawed, but that can tolerate the flaw and that can work towards alleviating it. And that's the pathway to the transcendence of tragedy, which is a much, like, compared to affirmation, it's like, you're giving a thirsty person dust to drink. There's nothing to it. You know, people have to commit to being in order to withstand their own vulnerability and fragility and essentially flawed nature. The way that you tolerate that the way you stand up underneath that is to adopt responsibility for it. And then your pathway is clear. Then you can tolerate who you are. And then you won't hate humanity, because people hate humanity. You hear the environmentalists, the radical environmentalists, say such things. I've heard people say this. The planet would be better off without people on it. It's like, well, let's keep you away from the hydrogen bombs, shall we? You know, and people think that's a virtuous statement. The planet would be better off without people on it. It's like, really? That's what you're saying. It's like, I see. You don't think it's okay to be racially genocidal, but it's perfectly fine to just wipe out all of them. That's okay, as long as you're not selective about it. So we're nourishing people, we're nourishing young people on nothing. It's nothing. It's like they're suffering, and no wonder, because life is suffering, right? That's the first thing you learn if you're on the road to wisdom. Life is suffering, right? And is it someone's fault? Yeah, sure, it's society's fault, it's your fault, it's nature's fault, it's God's fault. It's like, yeah, the fault's everywhere, man. So what are you going to do about that? Bear up under it and do something useful. And then you can respect yourself, at least to some degree. At least you're not contributing to the problem.
Yeah.
You know, and then maybe you can start to see the beauty in life and the possibility in life and the majesty in life and the incredible capacity of human beings for self-transformation. Here's an example. We've learned this relatively recently at a neurobiological level. You know, so there's been an idea, a psychological idea that's floated around for quite a long time, a clinical idea that you expand your character by aggregating diverse experiences, right? It's sort of, you journey everywhere to become who you are. And you can think about that from a Piagetian perspective, a constructivist perspective, and say, well, the more places you journey to in the world, the more information you expose yourself to, and then you take in that information and inform yourself with it, and you develop yourself because you're more differentiated and you have a more differentiated view of the world. It's like the basic idea is the world is a pool of information that you can use to construct yourself out of and to construct the world. And that's a lovely doctrine, and I believe it to be the case. But there's more to it than that. You know, we know now that if you take someone and you put them in a radically new situation, that new genes turn on in their brain at the micro micro level. New genetic structures code for new proteins and build new structures. It's like you're actually a pool of biological possibility. And the only way that you can determine the full extent of that pool, of the possibility of that pool, is by pushing yourself out against the world, and that will physiologically transform you. And we have no idea what the limits to that are. We know in clinical psychology that, you know, what you do with people is expose them to the things that they're afraid of and are avoiding. And you don't make them less afraid by doing that. You make them braver. That's why it generalizes, right? They don't come out saying, oh, the world's safe. It's like, once you've learned that the world is safe, not safe, there is no going back. That's the post-traumatic stress disorder conundrum. There's no going back. But what you can learn is, yes, the world is terribly dangerous, far more dangerous than you think. And people are far more malevolent than you likely have the imagination to conceptualize. But there is way more to you than you know. And if you wouldn't look for safe spaces and retreat, if you would push out in the world and accept your responsibility and confront your limitations, then you would discover all sorts of things about you that you have no idea about. And then you would transform into something that's far more than what you are. And it's in that process of continual transformation that you'll actually find the essential meaning of life. So, and again, this is, it's not like we don't know this. Everyone knows this. So, and the universities, in some sense, are supposed to remind you of this, but they've abdicated their responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, and in many cases are working counterproductively. They're trying to teach young people that they're helpless victims who need to restructure society in order. I don't know. I can't even say it anymore. It's so empty and dead. You know. I think I read this in Elias Kennedy in a book called Crowds and Power, and it was one of the things that really stuck in my imagination. He did an etymological analysis of the word slogan, and he said that it was derived from the Welsh, two words, sluag, S-L-U-A-G-H, and germ, G-H-A-I-R-M, and it meant battle cry of the dead. And that really struck me, because I've always had this sense that people mouthing ideologies are the puppets of corpses. It's something like that, the puppets of corpses of malevolent philosophers. You know, and they speak in dead tones, and they're not interesting. Like, if you're listening to an ideologue rattle on, you can hardly concentrate on what they're saying, because it's dead, it's death itself speaking, and it compels zero interest. And so even discussing this sort of thing, I find difficult to even formulate the words, because I'm so tired of that of that realm of discourse. It's like there's so many tremendous things that are remaining in the world for people to do if they stop being dead puppets of sick ideas. And it's appalling to me that it even and that opposition to that even has to be justified. Our entire civilization is opposition to that. And so, I mean, we can let it go if we want, but the alternatives are far gloomier than what we have now, I can tell you that. So we can let it all go. And we're being taught to let it all go. It's corrupt, it's rotten right to the roots. It needs to be retooled right to the very concepts that we use. It's like, yeah, what's going to replace it? What have we got that's better? You've got nothing that's better. What we have is something that could be far more than it is if people would just take it to the level that it could be taken to. And everyone wants to hear that. And that's has been a very long answer. This is why 91% of the people that are watching my lectures are men, as far as I can tell. So.
Dr.